Yep.
Okay. Right. Well, welcome back, guys. Sorry for the break, but here we are. So let's see questions here. Robin, real quick, your book, The Greater Weight of Glory, has won several awards. Can you share a quick blurb about it? Why'd you write it? What is your hope in writing this book? What is your purpose, your hope for it?
So since we're celebrating Mother's Day soon, I have two of my sons here. I would say, my son Spencer, the book kind of centered around who he was, his life, his death. But I would say there's so much more to the book, and it really was a God-given assignment to write this story, because it's really God's story. And it shares really who he is in the midst of, horrendous tragedy. God being a redeemer, God being a God of love always, and a God of hope no matter what. When we let him be, as Miles said earlier, our life is made up of choices, and it's a blessing for me to be here with Jake and to hear Miles talk, and just to listen to them, to realize that God is good. I have a son in heaven. I have a son in Malaysia. I have normally a son in North Carolina, but get to be blessed by having him spend a little time with me. And two wonderful daughter-in-laws and 5 grandchildren that are growing up in homes that love Jesus. And really, I think Spencer's life, if anything, would say to keep Christ center, to keep him first. And when you do that, and I think that's what the book is about. It just shows in the midst of just being a completely broken person, but saying yes to God, and to be able to watch what he does, not what I did, but what he can do is astounding. And it still takes my breath away. I'm still so grateful for all he's done.
Okay. So I believe both Miles and, well, Jake, definitely you, went through a rebellious stage. We're kind of a challenge at one point. And so,
all 3 of my sons.
Robin, what encouragement do you have for parents whose children are struggling or prodigals, or that just, haven't embraced, the Christian faith they were raised in?
I think one of the blessings in my life, and looking back, is I was always so aware of my shortcomings as a mother. I really, I gave my life to Christ when Miles was 5 years old. So, he grew up in this crazy home where his mom was a new babe in Christ and trying to learn and change things, and life was constantly changing, and Jake had this kind of crazy life too, where, he was uprooted. And when his dad and I decided to move away from all he knew to go pastor a church, and yet, my confidence has always been in who Jesus is. And that's what I've always pointed my sons to. I have never claimed to have any good answers of my own, but I know I've always been able to say, this is where the answers are, to point to Jesus, to point to the Bible. And I would say to parents, love your kids, pray for your kids. Don't hammer your kids if they know, like mine did, they knew the truth. They just had to come to it on their own, in God's timing, in God's way. And it's always a way that you never ever could make up on your own as a parent. It's always going to be very unique according to who your child is. And to just wait. It'll happen. It comes around, and it's glorious.
Okay. Miles and Jake, here's your chance to say Happy Mother's Day publicly and say what your mom means to you.
Oh boy.
On the spot.
I'll start. Um, so obviously, Mom, I love you. Happy almost Mother's Day. And I mean, so I guess instead of like trying to, yeah, I love her this much. Instead of trying to, tell you that, I think you know I'll tell you what I'm so grateful for. And so one thing she just kind of mentioned, and I'll tell you what that looks like from a child's perspective, and then the other thing I'll kind of talk a little bit about. But yeah, for me growing up, the best thing that Mom ever did was even more than try to. Well, I'll say, and I have this conversation with new parents a lot too. Sorry, I'm kind of stumbling here. The best thing she ever did for us was that she made it so there was no doubt in my mind that Christ was real. And it wasn't anything she said to me. It wasn't because she brought me to church, or it wasn't, I discovered God at some youth camp, or uh, it wasn't anything I ever read. It was the unwavering conviction of watching a woman pursue Christ. And we lived in a crazy house a lot of my childhood growing up, and I see, a lot of, I'm in the Christian culture, and I see a lot of American middle-aged parents and Christian parents trying to pursue Christ for their children, and doing all the right things that you're supposed to do, and getting the child involved in all these sorts of things. But I'm certain that the only thing that'll make Christ real, or like, obviously Christ himself, but the only thing for me that, like, my mom never, we didn't go to bed getting tucked in and praying at night as a family. We didn't do a lot of things that Christian families do, and that me and my family and Jake's family try to do for our children to show them Christ. There wasn't time for it as a single mom, but like I would watch her, and I would know that there was no doubt that Christ was real in her life. And I took that conviction with me wherever I went. And even at times when I was angry at God, there was times where I was just selfish and full of self-idolatry. And I didn't want there to be a God, because I was living a life that was not glorifying him. And with that comes burden and shame. And I wanted it all to go away. And I would say to myself, man, I wish God wasn't real. And then I could just live my life selfishly and happily. But my mother placed such a conviction. There was no doubt in my mind growing up that God had rescued her out of her own slavery of sin, and that she lived a life that made it impossible for me to think otherwise, that God would do otherwise for me. And so when I tell young parents, oh, what should I do, for my children, I'd say, don't worry about them. Worry about you and your walk with Christ. Follow Christ with all your heart. Yeah. And if you don't get to tuck them in at night and say night prayers because you have to work the midnight shift at the hospital, and God will figure it out. Don't worry, but you pursue Christ. The other thing that she did too, and I don't think, it's kind of God's grace. I don't think she had a great plan for this. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mom, but I remember writing her a letter years ago when I was coming back to Christ, and kind of realizing all the struggles people have in their own life of kind of following Christ, right? He asks us to go on this journey with him. And as we go on the journey, we hit all these obstacles, and all of them are our sin. But I think as a parent, what my mom did that was awesome is, and I didn't realize this until I started trying to pursue Christ again, was like, she removed so many of those obstacles before they ever got in the way, so that it made my journey easier. My mom didn't pursue worldly things, and I never got confused by that when I became a Christian. Like, for me to sell all my belongings and move to another country, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound blasphemous, but it's not so much God, it's my mom. Like, I never cared about worldly things because my mother never cared about worldly things. And so all of these barriers that people will struggle with, Forgiveness is another one. How can I not forgive my own children when my mother forgives the murderers of her oldest child? So these are all just barriers that people, when they start to follow Christ, they become roadblocks. And sometimes people stop their faith right there at the roadblock. And my mama and I, again, I don't think you planned all this out, but I just watching other people kind of struggle. And I certainly have my own struggles too, but so many of those things that people struggle with, my mom, you know, with God, of course, because like I said, I don't think my mom had a great plan at the time, but she really helped remove all of those barriers for me, and so that's why I'm so grateful for my mom.
That's cool.
Your turn,
Thank you.
Jay.
Everything Miles said.
Miles is smart. He went first.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of the same thing. I had, I think maybe the major difference growing up with, I did leave my mom and dad when I was about 15 years old, and we were actively pastoring a church in an inner city. And so if I was to say how much my mom meant to me, it would be to say it to her, personally tonight, that I'm sorry for taking advantage of, precious years. I mean, everything that happened to me as a teenager, and then the results of that and the outcome of that was completely my fault, is my doing. And I lost years in time with my parents as a teenager as the results of my sin and my bad choices. Just like Miles said, God, even in kind of extreme circumstances like that, where I moved, hundreds of miles away to people that I had never met before, and I lived with a completely different family, God, of course, was in control of the whole situation, and it all got figured out. And then to kind of reconfirm what Miles said is that there's a popular book out there called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it's about money and finances, but the premise of the book is that the guy had he had his own parents, and then he had his friends' parents who were better with money. So he calls one of them the rich dad and one of them the poor dad, because he had a totally different mentality. Well, that's kind of like I got that same vantage point. I lived with a different family who were also really strong Christians, and really good people. And then I lived with a lot of other people after that, different guys in the church. I just lived at a lot of houses with a lot of people, and I've lived with different, in different scenarios. And my mom and my dad together, like Miles said, are a standard in which I can only hope to someday rise to, in many facets of my walk with God. And so, like Miles said, we were, she never, we never sat down and, I was hearing my dad preach over the pulpit. So I heard a lot of, 3 times a week. So I heard a lot of preaching, but not in the house, that we were a family that just was a normal family, but with a mom that loved God. And so like Miles said, you never could walk around and act like you didn't know what to do and you didn't know where you ought to be. And so that was instrumental in me originally getting saved, because I had a lot of knowledge about the Christian faith, and I just simply needed to turn it on like a light switch. I just had to activate faith with it. And then since then, in my walk with God, I continually reference my mother in that way as I'm growing older, chronologically and spiritually, and just trying to, I'm in my late 20s, and I'm finally discovering that I know nothing. And so and so I'm just going back to my mom, who's in Miles. I talk with Miles to people who have already been there and who have conquered really big battles in their faith that, I can look to as a reference. So.
You guys have been amazing. Your mom has much to be proud of with both of you, but you still have a ways to go to catch up with her. Good luck on that.
Yeah.
We're working on our own books now.
That's right.
Good.
They're pretty
Awesome.
late.
Well, all right. I mean, any last minute, any one of you want to say, like, why should someone serve Jesus? Who is Jesus to you, and why should they serve him? Real quick, and we'll wrap it up.
I just want to say that I am so proud of my sons. And I want to say, too, that I think Spencer left a beautiful legacy for our family because, as both Jake and Miles said with me, the change with Spencer was so tangible and his intensity. And I think that's, and he had an uncanny sense of this life being so temporary. And this is not my home. I know that. And I'm so grateful, though, that being here, just to be able to have two sons that really do just love Christ with a very personal and like Jake said, always learning. You get to a certain point and you're just like, it's almost like the closer you get or the farther along you get, you feel like the less I know. And I'm 64, and I can say in a lot of ways that it's the less I know at this point. But I can just encourage them both to, we're all running a race, and we've got a finish line. And just to run well, finish well, and keep your eyes on the prize. That's what we have to do. And thanks, Rachel, so much just for this opportunity. It's been fun just being able to look at your smiling face and to listen to my sons. It's a great moment.
It's been a privilege. You guys are a blessing. Thank you for your testimonies, for all you do. And to my readers and listeners, check out Robin's writing and more about her ministries at spencersmom.com. And check out her book, The Greater Weight of Glory. And hope to hear more of the adventures from both of you. More books and maybe and on the blog, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
All right. Well, thank you guys. God bless you. I'm excited to see what God will do with us.
Amen.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Bye, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. Love you.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Love you
I'll
too.
call you on Mother's Day too. But
All right. Sounds good.
Better.
Bye, Mom. Bye, Rachel.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Rachel.